Alright, so I've let myself play around with the 1.0 release. I've been letting it sink in so I can give a good and honest review of the game, beyond just talking about server and connectivity issues. But don't worry, in my full 1.0 review I will talk about everything, all the good and the bad. But for now, I got excited for something that I haven't really seen too many people talk about, so I wanted to share my excitement with you all. As part of the 1.0 release, EHG made a couple of big changes to the Primalist class, and even more specific changes to the Shaman Mastery. In short, EHG made some key skill changes that make the Shaman Mastery feel so much better to play. If you've watched my class picking guide or have come to see one of my live streams, you'll know that my favorite class archetype in any game is the Shaman. I love to crush enemies with the power of the elements channeled through a huge two-handed weapon. I want to be an absolute fury of nature, swinging my weapon so powerfully that the air cracks with lightning when I make an impact with the skulls of my foes. Think Thor, but with a much bigger hammer than Mjolnir. Anyway, one of the problems that I had with the Shaman before was that prior to this change, you were lacking the abilities to make that big hulking melee Shaman a reality, at least one that actually felt good to play. For the Shaman, your only big melee skill was Earthquake, and until you could build yourself into some good mana management, Earthquake was pretty mana expensive. So you would throw out a couple of strong Earthquakes to clear enemies before having to run around waiting for your mana to regen. So while your mana was regenerating, you had other melee builder skills that you could use, which in theory sounds great, but unfortunately all of these melee skills felt a bit lackluster to use in practice. Swipe was very basic, and didn't have too many Shaman synergies. Upheaval felt more like a physical spell, and again, didn't have too many synergies with the Shaman. Serpent Strike is more of a minion poison spell that can only be used with a spear, so then you were left with Tempest Strike as your main melee skill. Tempest Strike was a Shaman skill through and through, using the forces of nature to hit enemies with elemental storms alongside your melee attacks. The problem with Tempest Strike was that it heavily relied on RNG. You had a chance to proc the elemental part of the skill, and you could always build yourself in having more of a chance to proc a specific element, but it was always a chance, not guaranteed. For example, I ended up speccing my Tempest Strike to trigger the cold and lightning elements as much as possible. This was still not a high chance, it was somewhere between 20 to 30% at max. So the majority of the time, I would be spamming a weak physical melee damage spell with no elemental damage at all. And for the Shaman, I was building all elemental damage to strengthen my Storm Totem, Storm Bolts, and Earthquake Aftershocks. Long story short, the Shaman was missing a melee skill that could be used to create synergies within the Shaman Mastery skills that also dealt a reliable and consistent amount of damage. So fast forward to 1.0, and EHG has implemented some major changes to Tempest Strike and added a new skill called Gathering Storm. Yeah, just 2 changes to the Primalist base class is all it took to make this mastery feel 10 times better to play. So first, let's talk about Tempest Strike again. Tempest Strike has been changed in one major way. The elemental attacks are no longer a proc chance, but instead part of a 3-attack combo. The skill costs more mana now, but it's much more reliable. The first attack on the combo is cold, the second is physical, and the third is lightning. This damage is then added to the base melee attack's physical damage. What this means is that you have 4 different types of damage that you can build with Tempest Strike to fit your other Shaman skills: cold, physical, lightning, and physical melee damage. So if you're trying to build a cold Shaman, you can do that. Just switch all your skills to cold and buff the cold attack part of Tempest Strike. Same with physical or lightning or even straight melee if you want. Changing from a proc chance to combo ability may seem small, but it basically alters the way that you think about using the attack, and that's apparent in some of these new skill nodes. As an example, you can specialize in any one element by giving yourself more attack speed, but you have to give up another element to do so. It won't change the combo though, you will still make 3 attacks in succession, but you just won't cast the element that you gave up. That swing in the combo just becomes a melee attack. This is a great trade-off for a guaranteed hit with a cold or lightning attack, if you want to give up the physical attack, or any combination of those options. The rest of the nodes on the skill tree buff the triggered elemental attacks, giving you more control over what you proc on each strike. I'll also mention that the actual animation of Tempest Strike just feels much better. But that's the reworked Tempest Strike. Costs a bit more mana, but it's more reliable and does more damage. Now let's talk about Gathering Storm. This is the brand new melee ability that, in my opinion, sort of enables you to create the melee Shaman. It's not entirely necessary, but my god, does it make you feel powerful at higher levels. Gathering Storm is a basic melee skill that costs no mana. You swing your weapon, and if you hit an enemy, you generate a storm stack. That storm stack is then expended, one at a time, to cast a storm bolt on a nearby enemy within range. It's a very simple concept, but boy did I love it. At lower levels, Gathering Storm can definitely feel a bit weak. You don't generate a lot of storm stacks because your melee attack speed is much lower, and you haven't specialized the spell as far. But once you get to mid-range or higher levels and you can buff the generation of storm stacks, you are blasting out storm bolts all over your screen. And EHG did some great work with storm bolts because if you played the Shaman before, you know that storm bolts are not new. They were already a part of the Shaman's kit, which means that the other Shaman spells and passives are built to buff your storm bolts as well. This is actually where I got the majority of my fun playing the new Shaman. I specialized my Gathering Storm ability to build up as many storm stacks as possible. By the time I was in Monoliths, I was generating over 20 stacks with most group mob encounters. I then specialized my Earthquake skill, and I took this node all the way in the top left corner over here called Fury of the Elements. This node expends 10 storm stacks to cast 10 empowered storm bolts at nearby enemies, which means amazingly powerful earthquake hits to burst down tough rares or bosses. But it doesn't stop there. The Fury Leap ability will shoot out storm bolts when you leap over enemies. The Maelstrom ability will expend additional storm bolts if you have over a certain amount of Maelstrom stacks. The Storm Totem not only gives you additional defenses, but can shock enemies and buff your lightning damage, which makes your storm bolts hit even harder.
But wait! There's more!
Head over to the Shaman passive skill tree and you have this lovely set of nodes that also increases the number of storm bolts that you cast. What this turns into is death by 1,000 storm bolts. Just by using Gathering Storm, I am generating like 4 or 5 storm bolts every half second. Add in Maelstrom and you're throwing out 3 more storm bolts every second. Fury Leap adds in 3 or 4 whenever I leap. Storm Totem doesn't cast storm bolts directly, but it does shoot lightning out everywhere and makes my storm bolts more powerful. And if ever I need to burst something down, I have Earthquake to spend 10 storm bolts all at once on top of the lightning-based Earthquake that does insane amounts of damage. All of this to say, I like Gathering Storm. I like storm bolts. I found a way to make my dream Shaman, and I'm happy about it. But are there any critiques that I have for the Shaman in its new state? Well, like I said before, the Shaman does feel a little bit weak at lower levels. The low storm bolt generation and weak melee physical damage of Gathering Storm makes it feel like you're hitting enemies with an electrically charged pool noodle. Tempest Strike actually feels much better at lower levels, but Tempest Strike sits in the middle of Gathering Storm and Earthquake in terms of its use. It's not as powerful as Earthquake, but not as quick and light on mana as Gathering Storm. It will contend for a spot on your skill bar, so if you're building physical or lightning damage, you may as well just go for Earthquake, since it does so much more damage. But maybe Tempest Strike is amazing for cold builds. I also don't claim to know everything, so maybe someone made Tempest Strike work better for lightning builds than Earthquake and Gathering Storm. Overall, I think the Shaman is in a much better place. EHG addressed a lot of the issues that the Mastery had, and I think it'll take me a long time to explore all the different build options here, so I am definitely happy. But what do you think? Have you had a chance to try out the new Shaman? What Shaman build do you find most appealing so far? Let me know in the comments below. If you're curious to know more about my Shaman build, you can catch me streaming live most Saturday mornings, 8 AM Pacific Standard Time. Come and ask me live and I'll have no problem showing it off. Also, if you haven't bought Last Epoch yet and want to try it out, the game is only $35 US, and you can buy it from my Nexus.gg store to support my channel at the same time. I'll put my link in the description. But most importantly, I hope you enjoyed the video. Leave a like if you liked it, and subscribe for more content. I hope you enjoy your adventures in Eterra, and I can't wait to see what we talk about next.